What's up, everyone? My name is James McCool. I'm the owner of PaydirtDFS.com, and today we're going to be doing a showdown season for the Bills versus the Patriots. This is probably going to be a lame one, but the nice thing about these two teams is that they do have a lot of different receiving options, which makes for a decent showdown. So what we're going to look at first is the range of outcomes. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to be following a pretty general thing that I do here with the showdown season. So typically what we do is go through first the captain exposures, and then we're going to go through the flex exposures. Then we're going to talk a little bit about highly duped lineups, as well as the players that are most likely to be in the duplication lineups. And then I'll give some final thoughts. So with that being said, let's take a look at the projections for this slate. I'm going to go to Showdown and go to the Buffalo versus New England. And look at that. The ownership is heavily concentrated on Josh Allen, James Cook, and Drake May. That's not necessarily a surprise to me, especially because the usage of so many of the other players is so spread out. Like, I mostly just expect people to just jam these three in, since all three of these guys have like very consistent roles. And I mean, look, there's a huge projection difference too. Josh Allen projected for 23, James Cook for 20, Drake May for 19, and then a massive drop down to Stephon Diggs at 12. So it makes sense that these three would be the ones that would have the highest ownership. These are absolutely the spot that you're going to be focusing. One of the things that I always do caution people with when it comes to rushing QBs is being wary of playing the rushing QB with their running back in the same lineup in showdowns. While it doesn't necessarily eat into a first standard deviation ceiling, it absolutely eats into the second standard deviation ceiling. So I'll probably talk a little bit more about that once we look at the contest sims, but just wanted to make that note really quick. If we look at 4x percentage here, we can kind of get an idea for players that might be worth using for value. So Demario Douglas and Joshua Palmer kind of stick out to me a little bit. Ray Davis is the top, but he's 600 and only projects for 3 fantasy points. Now, he could absolutely fall into the end zone. He could absolutely end up with like 10 fantasy points and be optimal, right? Especially if we're going to have Josh Allen, Drake May, and James Cook, right? Like, all three of these guys are the most expensive ones on the slate. You're going to need some value. I don't think that Ray Davis is the worst play, but more likely you're going to end up on a Demario Douglas or Joshua Palmer. Dawson Knox is also another option that I think makes a bit of sense, considering they do like to rotate their tight ends. But let's also take a look at what the contest sims say. So I just ran a normal contest sim here and ran it to get some idea of exposures. Now, overall exposures tell us how much players were found in the winning lineups overall at both captain and flex. And you can see, again, Josh Allen, Drake May, James Cook. Josh Allen shows up in 99% of optimal lineups. Drake May shows up in 91. James Cook shows up in 81%. When we go over and we look at the captain exposures, I already have this sorted by edge, but Ramondre Stevenson, Mario Douglas, and then Josh Allen is also a positive expected edge here. Shows up in 31% of lineups that won the contest as the captain, projected for about 28% ownership there. So some edge on the bone there. Drake May, very neutral, projected for 22% ownership, shows up in winning lineups 21% of the time. The one that looks like the worst play is James Cook at captain. That's a negative 11% edge. That's going to be hard to make up elsewhere. You can absolutely do it, but if you go James Cook in the captain, you're going to have to be pretty weird with who you play in the flex. Let's go ahead and take a look at the flex. So I have not sorted this one by edge yet. But if we do that, then we see James Cook is the best flex play. That makes sense. He's not a very good captain play, but he's a really good flex play. And then Drake May and Josh Allen. So you're really just building around these three. You shouldn't build a lineup without these three guys in it, as evidenced by the overall exposures and edges. The biggest negative edges at flex are Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakur, Hunter Henry, and Dalton Kincaid, and all four of these guys are negative 10% or worse. Now, all of these guys can be made up by having James Cook. His plus 34% edge means that you can eat three of these guys while still maintaining your positive edge. If you just pair that with Josh Allen and the captain, like, it's fine. You know, your edges are going to be fine. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. The thing that I would worry about, though, is that if you do that on a slate like this, where I expect for there to be heavy duplications and where I think that the core of players that are going to be used is going to be very tight. You just kind of you run into some issues around being able to win with enough expected value to make it worth it. So focusing on guys like Ray Davis, who I mentioned earlier in the range of outcomes being a strong play, I think he makes sense. Focusing on Joshua Palmer, projected ownership 14%, a positive edge of 3% here, shows up winning in lineup 17% of the time. I think that those guys make more sense. Mario Douglas, rather than trying to thread the needle with Hunter Henry, Shakur, or Keon Coleman. If we go over and go back to the range of outcomes and look at the optimals for this slate, let's go ahead and go Showdown, and let's go with Buffalo versus New England here. We're going to pull down ownership as a priority variable so that we can see highly owned lineups that are likely to be duplicated. And what we see here is we will end up with a lot of Josh Allen, a lot of Drake May, and a lot of James Cook, obviously. But when we look at these, let's see. I want to go. I want to say this at 47,500. That's what I'll usually do, and that should give us the full range. So then we have Matt Prater and Andy. I have no idea how to pronounce that. Boragelis. Yeah, I got nothing on that, dude. You're going to see these three be used the vast majority of the time, and Josh Allen and the captain. That's going to be the highest projected dupe lineups. Drake May and James Cook used in the flex. And then you're going to have some rotations here. You're going to have Ramondre Stevenson. You're going to have Matt Prater. The other kicker that I can't pronounce the name of, Hunter Henry. Like all of these guys here are going to be used in the flex core. And these are really just like F4 and F5 guys. These are going to be guys that are used in the flex 4 and flex 5 spots. And then you're gonna get a little bit weird. People are gonna plug in Joshua Palmer or Demario Douglas or Dawson Knox. I think both kickers are gonna be in play. People are gonna use them plenty. It looks like the Bills are probably gonna be used quite a bit here in terms of like the highest ownership lineups. And then the other main thing here is that we're probably gonna see more Buffalo stacks than New England stacks. However, if we go over here, okay, so that actually does look optimal, right? 61% of lineups in the contest sims were Buffalo stacks, and only 38% were New England stacks. So overall, how do we feel about the slate? I think the slate is fine. I think that what you're going to want to end up doing instead of just going kind of like with the regular stuff that we see in the contest sims, I would be avoiding the wide receiver 2s and looking to the wide receiver 3s, right? So let's go ahead and load back up the range of outcomes here. I would be kind of trying to get away from the Shakur and the Colemans and like, the Kincaids and Booties, and instead going down to the wide receiver 3s, the Joshua Palmers, Mario Douglases, Austin Hooper, Dawson Knox. Like, I think that in order to play these three and not get heavily duped, you kind of have to avoid one of these guys, at the very least, one of these guys. You could do something like these three together with a Josh Allen captain, where you pair it with Keon Coleman and Joshua Palmer, and then bring it back with Drake May and like fade James Cook maybe. Or you go Josh Allen plus James Cook and then do a New England stack on the other side with Drake May, Demario Douglas, and then Hunter Henry even. You could do Hunter Henry as well there, right? Because then you're kind of, trying to be a little bit different with the way that you bring in your combinations. But overall, it's going to be a highly variant slate. I think it's better for MME than single entry. If you play it with single entry, try to find one way to be different. I think the best way to be different is by saying, in large field specifically, I think that playing Ray Davis instead of playing James Cook, that's a really interesting way to go about this slate. It gives you a whole lot of upside with your running back. And it also gives you a lot of money to spend. That way, you can be a little bit different. Also, he's going to be low owned. So I think the slate is rough for single entry. Should be a good one, though. Hopefully you enjoyed this breakdown. If you did, then you can find all the models, obviously, over at Paydirt. You can check the subscriptions. You can grab a day pass for just $5. Join the Discord and the information. Otherwise, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Go collect some trophies, and I will talk to you next time.